Good morning. Thank you for listening to WXOX 97.1 FM in Louisville, Kentucky, or perhaps you're streaming at our sister station, WXND, which is 100.9 on the dial. This is Artist Talk with LVA, and I'm your host, Keith Waits. The show is produced by Louisville Visual Art, and we're here today to talk with two of several people who have contributed to an exhibit that Louisville Visual Art has placed at Metro Hall, the seat of the mayor's government. We've been doing that for a few years, and we have an exhibit that's up there now called Reflections on 12 Years that runs through December. It involves many artists: Carlos Gomez de Francisco, Ava Perz, John Cherry, Destiny Jackson, the Metro Communications Office, and the special contribution, the Polaroid Project, which is from Building Bridges Foundation, which is the Tyler Girth Foundation, which in that part of the project is brought to us through them and Louisville Urban League. So there's a lot going on, but today we're going to focus on the work of these two artists. Ava Perz was born in Gdansk, Poland. She received a master's degree in biology there, but found her true passion to be in fine art once she came to America. She left her job as a scientist to pursue her desire to create art, living in Europe and Latin America before coming to the United States, paired with worldwide travel and taking classes with contemporary masters Felo Garcia in Costa Rica and David Lafell in Santa Fe, allow Ava an extensive visual approach to her paintings. She currently lives in Louisville, Kentucky. Her works can be found in many private and corporate collections throughout the United States and Europe, and she exhibits internationally. I think she recently had some things overseas. Also with us today, Jonathan Cherry is a Louisville native, a stringer with Getty Images and the New York Times, and he has also been published independently by the New York Times, Sierra, Time Magazine, Vanity Fair, The Guardian, New York Magazine, The Washington Post Magazine, and others. The photographs he has in the show are from the protests that were happening surrounding the Breonna Taylor murder in 2020. But recently, it was announced that he had been chosen to be the recipient of a 2022 Pulitzer Prize for breaking news photography as a part of the Getty Images team that was dispatched to Washington, D.C. on January 6th, or Insurrection Day, I guess, as it will now be forever known. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So
thanks for having us.
Cool. Happy to have you. So Ava, let's start with you for a minute. So when we started looking at this exhibit, there was a lot of different kinds of themes that were being talked about. And one of the things that we found, the mayor's office wanted to sort of look back and have reflections on the entire time that Mayor Greg Fisher been in office. And we talked about economic development. Now, and I chose you and Carlos because you and Carlos, I feel like 12 years ago I know you were painting before then, but tell me if this observation about you is true or not. It seems like your work was that you were painting, but you weren't yet that well known. But in the last 10, 12 years, you've really grown and gained a higher profile as an artist. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think you had told me not too long ago, you had exhibited overseas.
Yes, I was lucky to be invited to French program for the artists from all around the world, and I was given the housing in a very beautiful old town of Antibes, and for 3 months, and just to paint and leave behind the paintings for the show at the Picasso Museum. So that was awesome.
Okay, cool.
Very grateful for that one. Yes.
Well, do you agree with me that at least your time in Louisville has been a really fruitful time and a good time for growth for you as an artist?
Extremely. This is where I could, how you mentioned, I'm a biologist and I worked as a chemist, and I did like it. It was what I was study for, but I really always wanted to just create, be free from and paint. So I was, when I arrived here, I met people and I landed up in a studio for adult mud pie studio in Middletown, Louisville.
Right.
And I met over there people, and especially the owner, Susan Howe, she helped me a lot. She was just pushing the right buttons with me so I could explore more about the painting, even though I didn't have the formal education for it. So, and overall, I feel like Louisville is so filled with the creative people, and just being around them let me be more creative and just trustful in myself and just keep painting.
Well, how would you, so let's talk a little bit about the work that's actually in the exhibit. Some of the paintings, we selected some paintings that existed, although there is one that was, you didn't do it for this exhibit, but you were doing it when I approached you,
Yes.
which a large multi-panel piece.
Yes.
So how would you describe your most current work? Like what's going on in your current work, you know, as opposed to maybe something that was going on 5 or 6 years ago?
The style that I paint, it's, I would say it's expressive realism, and I slowly go towards abstract. I am way not there yet, but I feel more free with using the colors. And even though I use very similar hues, that they are very closely related to each other, and but the depth of that color is so much different than it was in the beginning. And you paint a different subject, landscape, animals, mostly nature, but I find that flowers, it's always my thing when I am feeling maybe not comfortable or more lost in my work, that I don't know what to do. I go to the flowers, I build my confidence and peace, and go back to the piece that gives me so much challenge. So I discovered that nature and flowers are my thing to give me some peace in painting. And I keep exploring, I keep try to learn as I go. So,
well, something, you know, and we can see behind you a couple of examples too, but your compositions tend to be
simple.
Well, I was going to say uncomplicated, but you're focused on a certain object or group of objects or a form or a human. There are some things where you have like paintings of horses. There's one in the show that's of several horses, but in most of those situations, you know, as we see, I think we see behind you, and we see like apples, and the apples
are very early paintings, yeah.
Right, but even there, the apples are they look more like they're just in a field of color, as opposed to that being a tabletop or something like that. So it seems like you're separating out your subject and isolating them.
Yes, because the color is my really interest in the painting. So color is what's, I hope, coming forward, and the composition and the object, it's behind that, because the colors can have so much feelings and influence the people, how they see the painting. So I keep my background especially very simple, so the color of the object can come forward and talk by itself, hopefully. And mainly, and also the not just the colors are very limited, but also the strokes that I use for the form that I paint are very limited. So I feel like it helps to shine more the color than the form itself.
Right, your mark making, your brush work is very
minimal,
loose,
hopefully.
But it's also very loose and seems very spontaneous. You know, like the particularly the things that are in Metro right now, the newer things that I'm seeing, it seems they're never overworked. They seem very fresh.
Oh, thank you. I would love to be feel like that. And my line are very limited, and I am trying not to constrain myself with strict lines and the reality, but just let it loose and concentrate more on the emotion of the strokes. It's how you said. I mean, that was a very nice, and thank you for that observation. Very loose and hopefully
spontaneous.
More than several lines. Yes.
I like your work. I wouldn't have asked you to be in the show otherwise.
Thank you.
But John, I don't want to be ignoring you. Let's talk about, so in this, of course, this could not be more of a contrast. You're a photographer and you're a photojournalist. So you're seeking to capture, is it that you're trying to capture the absolute reality of the moment in front of you when you're working?
It depends usually on the usage of the photos. If it's something that has a little bit more stylistic freedom, I will normally try to capture what's happening in front of me, but the way that the image is toned and the selection is edited will kind of be based off of the memory of how I felt in those moments. So it might not be as true to life, but it feels a little bit more true to memory. But if I'm doing any kind of editorial work for an outlet like Getty Images or Reuters, the New York Times, the toning is kept as true to life as possible, just to preserve the integrity of the moments and show people here's what there was to see there without any added frills or stylistic backflips.
Well, the photographs, well, you had two roles here. We should acknowledge. One is some of your photographs that you took during the Black Lives Matter protests that were, I guess, the summer of 2020, we'll say. It seems like they went on much longer, but I think that most of the work there is probably earlier, those first couple of months. Is that true?
Yeah, so the first day of protest in Louisville was May 28th of 2020. And I spent the rest of May and almost every single day in June photographing what was happening. And I think that we could effectively say the protests ended in November of 2020. So as time went on, there was less and less to photograph. There was less really happening. But at those really heightened moments at the very beginning, it's where a majority of that work came from.
Well, so, and going back to the point you were making earlier, so did you just go out into the protests and start to photograph? Were you on assignment, or was that a situation where you talk about the usage? Who's your end user? Where the assignment comes from? Did those photographs come from just your action, or were you knowing that those photographs were going to a certain place?
So whenever the protests first started, that first evening, a friend of mine and I went out to go and just kind of see what was happening. He suggested that I bring one of my cameras with me. Mm-hmm. And that night really invigorated this need to tell the story about what was happening in our city. I felt a lot of empathy towards Breonna Taylor and towards her family, and was angry, rightfully so, by the things that I saw happening in my city, what I saw happening in Minneapolis, what I saw happening in Georgia, and a lot of the racial violence that I've experienced personally and seen my family experience throughout my life. It felt like this was kind of coming to a head, and we didn't have to feel this way anymore. And there was a lot of change coming. And I think people had a lot of options. You could pick up like a first aid kit or a brick or a gun. I chose to have the camera be the tool that I used to contribute towards this effort. So all of that was up until August was like an independent endeavor, and all the photos were mine, and I wasn't shooting for anyone. But I will say that even though I was shooting independently, it did not come without compensation. I had a lot of people in the community that would leave food on my porch. I had someone got a hold of my Venmo account, and I was getting Venmo donations, pretty much daily, just to support my work, just to keep me going, gas, food money, things like that. I received a couple of grants that summer. One of them allowed me to buy another camera for the reason that if I was arrested or if something happened and I lost my other camera, that I'd be able to continue on shooting those next days. I won another grant for body armor. And so actually the day after Tyler Girth was killed in Jefferson Square Park, I made a promise with my mother that I wouldn't go back to the protests until I had a bulletproof vest. And so that sparked the need for that, and also that need was accommodated thanks to the community. And August 11th was my first ever editorial assignment, and that was for Getty Images News. And I continued to intersperse editorial assignment work with my own independent work for the rest of the year.
Cool. Well, and I just so I don't forget this, you also co-curated this exhibit, particularly because there was a desire to have images from the Metro Communications Office, the people working for the mayor and for the city that have been out documenting events, which is sort of, I guess, largely a balance to your photographs, to sort of provide. I think anybody who doesn't understand that the last couple of years, 2 or 3 years, have been, whatever your feelings are about it, definitely marked this 12-year period of time. They're definitely a momentous time in this 12-year period, before you even start talking about COVID. But some of the more sort of, I hate to make these kind of distinctions, but I guess to say upbeat. But the thing about that's what the mayor's office was shooting. But the thing I find about your images, and that you and I talked a lot about this, is that even though they are images of the protest, I don't think they're at least what's present there is, it's not violent, it's not downbeat, it's not depressing. There seems to be a lot of I think there's a lot of energy and personality to the people in those photographs that I think about them. They must have felt like they were accomplishing something. They were standing for something. And I think that's reflected too in the way that they were supporting you, understanding how important it is for good photographers to be out there and doing that sort of documentation. But I think, as soon as you say you've got images that are dominated by the protests, that I think a lot of people immediately get turned off to that. But I think it's an opportunity to look at those people that were in those protests and understand that they are the citizens of the city.
Yeah, they're citizens of the city that said that, people like Breonna Taylor, who was killed in her home in a botched drug raid, that by all evidence, maybe not by all legislation or by judicial decisions, was potentially unlawful, and a relatively innocent woman died. And it was not the first time that we'd seen something like that in Louisville. And it's definitely not the first time we've seen something like that in the country. And I think that people were not only emboldened by this act, and also by the highly televised murder of George Floyd, but there wasn't much else to do either. We were in a really fragile point as citizens, where everyone was laid off pretty much at the same time, or a lot of people were laid off at the same time. All the bars and restaurants and clubs and golf courses and everything that could have been a distraction from this was closed. And so everyone's heads were turned towards this issue. And we're saying that this is not how, just forget the fact that Breonna Taylor was a Black woman. This isn't how we treat citizens within our city. This isn't what we do. This isn't what we accept.
Right. Well, and when you speak about it being unlawful, it's certainly very, very clear from the LMPD's own investigation and record keeping that it was definitely not following any of their protocols for how any of that stuff's supposed to be done. And we now know that there were lies told to get the warrant, and officers have been relieved of their just aside from whatever suspicions or questions we might have, the facts that have been established show that it was something that should not have been happening at all. They should not have been on that doorstep. And
the first thought that I had whenever I think I was on March 14th or 15th that I heard of 2020, that I heard about what happened to this woman, Breonna Taylor. My first thought was that it was a robbery. I thought that that it was a robbery, and just last week, I think that big Vice News expose came to be, where there was an informant, and we don't know exactly the credibility of all of this, but there was an informant that exposed LMPD for other robberies, and the fact that there might have been money stored at Breonna Taylor's house that was not accounted for in evidence from that case. So I think that a lot of our first inclinations about what had happened that evening were probably right, and I think that the reactionary means that people took to the streets with were also just, and I think that it was relatively tame compared to a lot of other cities, which really I think speaks to our city as well.
Right. Well, and again, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but you and I have talked before about that the violence that occurred in some of those first nights, the sort of looting and stuff, seems to have been very much from outside people outside the city who came in to create that sort of disturbance in an attempt to discredit the protesters. And it's pretty shoddily done because there's there are security cameras that show the individuals, and they were clearly not a part of the protests. But anyway, so that's the kind of work you were doing. So let's just take a minute to talk about how you got this Pulitzer Prize. So, and again, to emphasize how relatively new you are to this as a career, that like you say, you had your first professional assignment in August of 2020, and then here in when was it announced? Was it in April?
It's early
April.
May.
Early May.
I want to say it was May 11th.
Early May of 22. You have won a Pulitzer Prize. Talk a minute about what it was like in DC, because now this is an assignment. This is sort of not the opposite, but that different side of what you were talking about earlier. You were in DC along with, is it 3 or 4 other guys for Getty?
There were 4 other members of the team that were for Getty. There was myself, another freelancer who's based in DC, Sam Coram. You had Wynn McNamee, who's the chief photographer for Getty Images based in DC. Spencer Platt, who is a staff photographer for Getty Images based in New York. And Drew Angerer, who is a Getty Images staff photographer based in DC. And I definitely recognize the kind of meteoric takeoff of my career and the places that it's led me to. And it was in November of 2020, actually, whenever I pitched the idea of going to Washington, D.C. on January 6th to the editors at Getty Images. And they shot it down initially because there are so many photojournalists that live in DC. One of them can just simply walk to the Capitol or take an Uber to the Capitol and photograph this thing. But at the time, nobody considered it to really be a credible threat, despite some of the other really harsh right-wing protests and riots that were happening in DC in the months leading up to it. But in January, I want to say it was on January 4th or 5th, I got an email from one of the editors at Getty and said, "Hey, actually, we're going to need some help. Can you come on out?" So that morning of January 6th, one of the first things that I heard whenever I stepped out of my hotel was "F Black Lives Matter," like directed at me. Even though I'm just obviously like a member of media, it's got cameras on me and all of that. So that was a pretty good indication of what the rest of the day was going to look like. And it was a very dangerous situation. There were only a few times in the protests in Louisville that I felt that that bodily harm was imminent and that I was afraid of it. On January 6th, it was a day where members of the media were targeted, people of color were targeted, Capitol Police were targeted, and it was it was a massive crowd. I mean, I want to say that there were maybe between 20 and 30,000 people there. Not all of them were on Capitol grounds, but the people that were on Capitol grounds were aggressive, and they were very resolute in what it was that they wanted to do. And so I found it difficult, especially being so new to the industry at the time. This was only 5 months after I'd had my first assignment, to maintain my composure and create the shots. So a lot of the time what I did was leaned on the fundamentals of photography that I knew and let all the chaos happen around me. So fortunately, the Capitol building is a very symmetrical structure, and symmetry being something that that you can lean on whenever times are hard, created one of those Pulitzer photos, and it was actually the opening image for our entry. But yeah, no, it was a really hard day. It was a difficult day for a lot of members of the media, obviously for Capitol Police as well, with some of the impending suicides that happened afterward. I have a couple of very close colleagues that were based at the Capitol that no longer work at the Capitol anymore. They have the outlets that they work for now have agreed to transfer them to either working around the Washington, D.C. area or pursuing more national stories. It was a day that took a lot from a lot of people, members of the media, and the mental toll that it took is something that's lasting for many of us.
Did you wear the body armor your mama told to get you?
I did.
Okay.
And, you know, I think I wish that I had worn it underneath my clothes instead of on top, because it is one of those things that kind of calls attention to you
Yeah.
unnecessarily at times.
Well, great. Well, Ava, didn't mean to ignore
Oh,
you.
that was very interesting. No, I
Yeah.
enjoyed it.
Um, well, it is interesting, and I don't know that I've ever been in a situation where I felt at risk for that kind of bodily harm. Have you?
No, no, I would love to not do. Yeah, and when I was like listening to John talking about his work, like if there's so much energy, so much emotions, and um, everything is going on, how do you choose what to shoot and what to concentrate your attention on?
It's a really great question. Actually, there were a lot of photos that day that were not made because the observation was happening and not the clicking of the shutter. You know, because there was a lot that happened during January 6th that was very cinematic, and I at times couldn't believe that I was there witnessing this. There was one point where we approached the inaugural platform after the crowd had broken through all of the barriers, and the crowd between us and the west walls of the Capitol was just so thick, and you couldn't see over it. And at a certain point, you look over the crowd and you see scaffolding raising, and you see all these guys with American flags and Gadsden flags that have hijacked this scaffolding, and they're using these flags to break into, or to attempt to break into, the second floor or third floor of the Capitol building. And that was something, I think I got one photo of it, but it sits so clearly in my mind. It's just a moment of wonder, like how is this really happening, and then also how are we here to witness this? And that's one of the things I like about this industry or this profession, more than anything, is just being there to witness it for myself. There were a lot of misconceptions about what happened on January 6th that if I wasn't there, I might have believed them, or I might be confused about what happened, but I'm not confused about what happened at all because I saw it with my eyes.
Well, it's interesting to think there's the story you're providing, but then there's also the story you experience. There's like another level that the image is one that Pulitzer Prize, but you almost, and I know that there were people writing about that day. Reporters were on the ground too, but at the same time, it's that talking about that experience of what it's like to be in that environment. I think it's easy to imagine the photographers are sort of benign elements moving around without anybody paying attention or interfering with them. Well, we just have a little bit of time left, so I do just want to, Ava, what is coming up for you next? All right, do you have any things scheduled, any shows?
So I have I'll be doing those statue of horses that are around the town. So I am going to do the Bado. There is the new collection coming up. So this one, and well, I have a new artist obsession. So I am right now, her name is Joanne Mitchell. She's an abstract painter. So I'm so obsessed right now with her work. So I want to create a new collection of, it's still my style, very realistic, very realistic the way I do it, but more loose and more abstract, and create few pieces of this kind of the work, and make a show exhibit with it. So right now I just started. It's not going well, but I'll be fighting. I do want to create that collection.
Well, good. Then we'll have you back there to talk about it. It's interesting that you talk about as this journey to abstraction. I've seen many painters go through, because the more you paint, the more it's an honest sort of discovery that occurs in the painting process for so many people.
And to create a good abstract, I feel it's very, very difficult. I feel like it's easier to do a very good realistic painting than abstract, because abstract, you don't see it. You have to feel it. It has to come from inside. So that's where the challenge is. But I am up to it, and I hope it will work.
That's an interesting observation. I completely understand it, but of course, a layperson would assume the opposite. The people who don't, they assume that abstraction is from a lack of talent, skill, observation.
Oh no!
And it's not. Yeah.
And
It's a longer journey.
abstract art to me is absolutely mind blowing because my medium is I'm only photographing things that exist
Yes.
in real life before you. So I can't imagine what it may be like to have to feel your way through understanding a subject and putting it out there.
Yeah, sometimes it's a pain, but it's like a good pain, that you want to keep overcoming, and you're not afraid of that pain. Yeah, no, definitely.
Well said.
John, what's going on for you now? Do you have any big assignments, or are you just waiting for the next call?
Well, fortunately, I'm actually waiting for calls. Normally, normally I'm kind of like known for being a self-pitched journalist, and living in this region where there's not a whole lot of national news happening, you have to be that way. So finding subjects that interest me, that I want other people to know about, that I also want to learn about as well, has normally been my bread and butter. But I got really burnt out last year, so I have been kind of riding the Pulitzer high a little bit, and
sure,
I have been getting a lot of great calls about assignments that are important and that also mean a lot to me. So it's been a really well-paced journey so far this year. I think in 2021, which was my first full year of freelance photography, I proved to myself that I could work really hard. And now this year, I'd like to prove to myself that I can balance it all as well.
Oh, terrific, terrific. Well, thank you both for being here, and thank you both for being involved with this this exhibit. It's going to be up through December. It's in Metro Hall. It's open to the public every day, I think like 8 to 5, and there's going to be a reception. I don't know that the reception is for the public or for invited guests. You guys can invite anybody you want, but on June 13th, we're going to have a little thing about it. So, but thank you guys so much for being with me this morning.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Keith. Thank you, Ava.
Thanks.